Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you everybody for taking the time at the end of a busy day to come and listen to me chat about babies. Now, Fiona contacted me from Twinkl, Scotland, and I then got into a deep dive into all of your documentation in Scotland, investigating the differences and the similarities, and actually, in the end, without diving down a rabbit warren of your documentation across British documentation, I decided that I would sort of stick with what I work with regularly, which is the English documentation, because what I found was there's an awful lot of similarities between the two. So forgive me if you're in Scotland and I am talking about English documentation, but I know that you will recognise an awful lot of what I'm saying. And my country of birth is Scotland, so my heart is with you. So let's talk about babies' brains and why we care about babies' brains. And to be honest, when I started out on this journey, I had never really considered the importance of babies' brains. I'd considered babies' development, not baby brain building and how we develop brains. They kind of came in a body. I didn't really think about them as a thing. But the more I've learned, the more I've realized how fundamental this is and our knowledge is to our practice and our babies' outcomes. So the first question I'd really love you to just have a little think about in your mind is, how early is too early to start thinking about babies' brains? And you might be surprised by the evidence, because the evidence is saying, wow. And it made me sit up and think. It literally changed my career when I started learning about the science and the evidence of and the research behind the learning and development that happens in the first 1,000 days of life, which is the time from conception to 2. Because what we're finding is that the science is showing us that just 22 months old, that's before they've left your toddler room. It's an excellent predictor of the academic outcomes at 26 years old. And that for me was just startling and empowering and exciting and frightening all at the same time. And, you know, what can we do about that? And what are the implications about that for us, other than ever so slightly scary? So let's have a little look at the science behind the first 1,000 days. Now, this science comes out of the Center of Developing Child, Harvard. It is new research. It was first published in 2020, and that's with the brain scientists doing their thinking. And then that's got to roll out from the brain scientists to the thinkers, to the researchers, and then down to you and me, and then down to Joe Public. So it takes a long time for clever thinking to get all the way down to us. Now, the first 1,000 days is, the science is so compelling. It shows us that the impact that these 33 months have goes across all areas of life, from academic success to physical and mental health and their well-being, relationships. It even impacts how much people go on to earn and who they go on to marry. The first 1,000 days, like I said, starts in conception and it goes through until the age of 2. And it's the period of time that the brain is literally building itself. And that happens through the experiences and opportunities that are offered to the babies through their daily life. And nature gives us 9 months. And science shows us that we have these 33 months of optimal time to set our children and our families on a trajectory of success. And how we use that time is up to us. But one of the questions we need to ask is, 1, is it ever too late? And 2, what does brain building actually look like, and how do we do it, and what are the implications for us? But this graph here shows us it's never too late. You can always learn, but the earlier you learn, the more you learn and the quicker you learn. But for me, take a look at the difference between the 2-year-olds and the 4-year-olds, and the impact of that learning and the ease and the amount of learning that those little tiny people are able to learn. It's amazing the difference that those 2 years make. But what exactly does this brain building look like? How do we do it? And what are the implications for us in our settings? Now, this mum and baby do a fantastic job of showing us. So brain building isn't about doing more in your setting. It's about recognizing the power of what's already happening in your setting. We often imagine that if we're building brains, and that sounds really grandiose, and it sounds like it's big stuff, and we often think that big development needs big action, but in reality, brains are built through thousands and thousands of tiny moments. It's through repetition and connection within those moments that create the brain building that we're looking for. They're the bits that are important. And what we've got here is the science of serve and return that's so beautifully demonstrated here. The baby serves an action, the mum responds. They're hugely connected. The eyes are connected. The baby and the mum are locked in this beautiful game together. And when the baby serves that moment of connection and you respond, like this mum is, you make space for the baby's response, you are literally creating pathways in the brain that form the foundations for communication, learning, language development, and emotional safety, and it's huge what this tiny moment that you could really easily miss. It's huge how big this is. And that serve and return process that we're watching is the foundation of cognitive growth and the development of our babies. It's those everyday moments that build brains, but only when we understand what's actually going on and what we're doing and what our role is. In this video, this is an absolutely excellent example of what not to do. This video, we see a child stacking blocks. Well, the carer is stacking blocks. The child is fascinated by the blocks. And this is something that we might see every day in our settings going on. And the adult is completely captivated by their job. Their job is to build that stack of blocks. The baby couldn't care less about that stack of blocks. The baby's focus is on the different blocks. And when we look really closely, that adult is present physically, but they're completely lost in their own task. They aren't naming anything for the baby. They're not noticing anything that the baby's particularly doing. They're not narrating what's going on. They're not focused on what's important to that baby at that time, because they're busy in their own play, and the connection is completely missed. And the learning opportunity for that child is also missed. And in a busy baby room, this is really easy to have happen, because often we can be busy being busy. And it's in those moments where we focus in, like the previous video, where that mum had completely locked into that child, where the learning happens. Here, what we've got is a missed opportunity for brain building. The baby is offering a serve and return. Had the adult connected at the point when the baby's looking at the different blocks and taking the blocks off, there could be that connection, that serve and return moment, but it's just not happening. Now, compare that to when a baby coos and you respond. Or when you chat to a baby and you chat them through that nappy changing, or you name things that a baby is touching. It's there that the brains are built, in those responsive, language-rich moments. It's not in the planned activities necessarily, or the laminated resources, or in the moments that you've planned for Halloween, or I don't know, water, or whatever topic you might have. It's in the tiny interactions that we almost barely miss and barely notice. But when those moments become intentional, they become incredibly powerful tools for learning, for developing safety, and for creating that all-important connection for our babies. And the reality is that this kind of missed moment happens every single day in hundreds and hundreds of settings across the country. And I'm not really surprised, because they're busy spaces. But what if we were to take some time every day to build those moments of focused concentration and connection for each child? We might make a massive difference. Those moments aren't missed because staff don't care. Often it's because they don't realize what's at stake in these tiny, tiny moments and interactions. So why does it all matter? Let's totally zoom out and have a big look at the long-term impact. What we know from Dr. Bruce Perry, and I just realized it's not on this slide, but Dr. Bruce Perry is an American psychologist and neuroscientist, and he carried out some research that looked at babies who had been born into utter chaos, and he followed them they looked at them for 60 days. So some babies were born into utter chaos, and then after that, their life went onto a fantastic trajectory and everything was all fantastic, while other babies were born into fantastic environments for 60 days, and then all the wheels fell off and life was dreadful from there on in. And what he found was that those babies who had had just 60 days of responsive, loving care did better on all measures in life outcomes going forward than those who'd had just 60 days of chaos and then life was fantastic going forwards from there on in. So what we're born into really matters, and that's really powerful, shows how powerful those early experiences are. And we also know that the earlier we intervene, the more impact we have, and the greater the cost saving of that impact. So Nobel laureate James Heckman found on this graph here, there we go, there was a 13% return on investment for high quality birth to 5 interventions. But if you look closely at the impact and the difference, again, between our youngest and our oldest, it's showing us again that the earlier we intervene, the better the savings, the greater the impact, the longer lasting the effect. So the more we invest in our babies, the better the outcomes are going to be going forward. And I was listening to a really good talk, it was put on, I think, by Nursery World a couple of weeks ago. June, the name is escaping me now, from Dr. June, somebody from Leaf, you'll all know who I'm meaning. Forgive me, I've forgotten her surname. She was saying that in all her outstandings have from Ofsted have come because of what's happening in the baby room. It really does impact everything that happens going forward. So what happens when our early opportunities are missed? Well, if we don't build brains early, we're not just deferring learning, we're creating ultimately bigger challenges further down the line. And we can see from these school readiness figures that come from 2022, but they could have come from 2023 or 2024. They're all sort of looking similar. This survey is carried out every single year, and nearly half our children are starting school effectively unprepared for the environment in which they're starting. And that's not just academically, but also developmentally. And it's not just about them being able to count or hold a pencil, it's about their language and their focus and their communication and even their emotional regulation. All of these are the fundamentals of their future learning. So this 2022 YouGov School Readiness Survey showed us that we've got 91% of teachers that are surveyed had at least one child in their class that couldn't use the toilet. 93% had at least one child in their class that didn't have basic language skills, and by that they meant they couldn't say their name and they couldn't answer simple questions. And 99% of teachers surveyed had at least one child in their class who didn't know how to listen and respond to simple instructions. And then we got this report out by the speechandlanguage.org.uk. And what they found was that 1 in 5 children were struggling with talking and understanding of words, and that 80% of teachers surveyed think that children in their classroom are behind with their talking and their understanding of words. And what that means is that leaves all our schools and effectively our nurseries playing catch up right from the very beginning, because we know from this research that a child who arrives in school, so the researchers love free school meal kids and children who come from challenging backgrounds. And the reason they love those is because they show a marked difference, a wider difference. But if they're showing a marked difference, then other children are also showing a difference. It may just not be so statistically obvious in the research. So what they found, what they did was they took children, these are children who are on and off free school meals, and these children who are persistently on free school meals. And they found that those that started school 4.3 months behind their peers in reception, by the time they reached secondary school, and they'd been on free school meals, reached secondary school, so they're not yet taking their GCSEs or their hires or anything like that, they've fallen 24.3 months behind their peers. So by the time they're 16 and taking their exams, you can see the implications of those 4.3 months behind their peers at reception. And that's because what happens is that our children come in and into our schools. I'm sure you see it in your settings. Some children will just go and fly right the way through it. And you inevitably, the class moves at the level of the middle to higher end of the class. And the others are all desperately trying to play catch up. And they end up building masking strategies to get through the day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are able to utilize the learning and access the learning that's available to them. And we know from this research that so many of our children are missing these early opportunities. Now, I wonder how many of those missed moments, if we'd caught them, if we'd known what to look for, would have turned from being missed moments to being brain building moments. And the Royal Foundation, in their State of the Nation, Understanding the Public's Attitude to Early Years survey in 2021, found that 1 in 3 parents didn't recognise that the brain develops fastest in the period from conception to 2. That's 36% of parents. But what they also found was that 1 in 4 parents didn't recognise that what they do between birth and 18 months has a large impact on their child's future life outcomes. And that misconception was greatest amongst our most deprived communities. And in the State of the Nation report 2025, we realise that there's still not a lot more understanding. Now, nearly everyone agrees that early childhood matters, but only 1 in 5 people recognise that the first 5 years, starting from pregnancy, are the most crucial. And even though that public knowledge has risen, slightly more than, say, 40% still say they know very little about how social and emotional skills are built during this period of time. And 41% of parents were found to have sought advice to understand their child's learning and development and what they can do to support it. Parents don't know what they don't know. So knowing what questions to ask can be part of the problem. And while there's awareness and it's improving, over half of the public still think we aren't doing enough to support children and families at this stage. So the message is spreading, it's important, But why and what and how isn't translating terribly well. And the Royal Foundation, this is really fascinating, found that 70% of parents with children from 0 to 5 felt judged. And the areas that they felt judged about were their parenting and their child's behavior and their child's development and the food that their child ate, but also what they looked like. Well, we can't necessarily do anything about what they look like, but we can help them with the other stuff. But what was fascinating was when they asked during the same research, what did you do as a parent when you were preparing for your first baby? 67% prepared a place for the baby to sleep, and they also prepared items. They paid money for stuff, and they bought clothes and toys and that sort of, and teddy bears and that sort of thing. And only 11% of parents found out about child development before the birth of their first child. And it's not really surprising then, is it, that you then, if you're trying to do something that's skillful, like parenting and raising a child and helping with child development, if you haven't learned about it, you don't know about it, it's not very surprising that you feel judged and unsure and insecure. And very often as early years practitioners, because of the way the system's gone, you are the first and most consistent professional that a parent will have seen on their parenting journey. We no longer have a consistent midwife. We no longer have a health visitor. If we go and get our babies weighed, it's in a corridor in the doctor's surgery, and there's no one to talk to. So there's no central space for advice in the same way as there was. So, and when with the introduction of more babies coming into our settings, people are putting their baby's name down for nursery earlier, which means that often they are pregnant. And therefore you have this amazing ability to become this trusted source of information for the parents. And if we get it right, we can build amazing parent partnerships and that become real. But very often we as a profession think, and we'll say, oh, but my parents wouldn't do that. My parents aren't interested. My parents don't want to do that. But when you look deeper, parents aren't not wanting to do that. Parents are desperate. It's not that they're uninterested. They're just uninformed. They don't know what they don't know, and they're actually feeling unsure and frightened. And I'm on TikTok, and I have so many conversations with parents. I had one just now. My baby's 5 weeks old. Does my baby know that I love them? I mean, isn't that the inner soul of a parent who's frightened and unsure? Please tell me my baby can see me and knows who I am. I mean, that's just, for me, it's just a plea for support and advice and nurture and guidance from our parents. But often we as practitioners think, yeah, but they're out there, their job is to deliver the baby to me so that I can look after the baby and they can go to work or do whatever it is to do. Actually, no. Our job is to build this foundation of connection and trust and nurture, not just for our babies, but also for our parents. And we need to know that our parents don't know what doing it right, and I put that in inverted commas, looks like, but they know they're trying to do it right. They don't know what they should be doing with their baby all day. They don't know what a newborn's day should look like. And that uncertainty breeds this lack of confidence. And all this is set against the backdrop of screens. And screens play an increasing role in a child's day. There was a Canadian study that had over 2,500 participants, and it was carried out in 2019. So now I suspect these numbers would be very different. And what they found was that children were clocking up a shocking 17 hours of screen time by the time they were 2 in a week. But that increased to an unbelievable 25 hours a week by the time they were 3. And I'm not so worried about the screens particularly, but just think about that in the light of a child's awake time and development time. So much of their possible development time is being stolen by these screens. And then there was a new study that came out last year, in June last year, in child development, and it found that it looked at parents and their use of phones. And it found that phones used by mothers were linked to a 16% decrease in maternal speech directed towards the baby. And that reduction was more pronounced. They looked at episodes of phone use throughout a day between 1 and 2 minutes and up to 7 minutes. And what they found was that it was the short phone use, the events of 1 to 2 minutes, where the speech dropped, the interaction with the child dropped by 26% during that time. But possibly the most frightening statistic that they found was the use, the amount of time spent on phones. What they found was that on average, mothers were clocking up in a 12-hour period 4.4 hours of phone use in these micro moments. Think about the development time lost. And if you've ever seen the still face experiment, that's what happens when we use screens. You look at the kids on the screen. These are my 2 eldest, and there they are again with my youngest and my husband. Guess what they're doing at this point? Yes, quality mothering right there. They were watching the telly, probably the Wombles or something really exciting. And here they are deep in the Animal Boogie Woogie. I mean, who's not to love that book? But look at the engagement, look at the connection, look at the cognitive development that is absolutely pouring out of those children in the commitment, the connection to that book, the bonding, there's so much more going on in that bottom picture than there is in the top. And if we've got 17 hours of children watching TV and 4.4 hours every 12 hours of our parents watching screens, got a problem. So we might not be able to change the home environment. I'm not asking you to take your fairy wands out and go and twinkle around and mend the home environment, but we can influence it. And we can absolutely shape the experiences that the baby has when they're with us. And we can do that from starting from the very first look around your setting. Think about it. Babies may spend, 30 to 40 hours with you a week in your care. That's 30 to 40 hours of amazing opportunities to build brains every single week, every single day, and to support their development and to model connection and to connect with that baby. It doesn't take new resources. It just takes your presence. And I love that word because it is a present. To be present. It's in our tone of voice. It's in the way we narrate that nappy change. It's how we respond to a coo or how we pause when a baby initiates some connection. And if a child's home is chaotic or screen heavy, we might be that only consistent, emotionally attuned adult in their life. And that means the ordinary moments we spend with babies really aren't ordinary at all. They're powerful and they're shaping that child's future, because to babies, simple's never simple. It's literally brain building. And all of this isn't about blame. If this isn't happening in your setting at the moment, it doesn't matter. And most parents, if they're not doing it right, it doesn't matter, because most parents genuinely want to do the right thing. They're just unsure. They don't understand the importance of the first 1,000 days. They told us. They feel judged. They told us. They don't know what early learning looks like. They told us that too. Many of them are absolutely desperate for support, but they don't know how to ask. And often that comes off as aggressive or distracted or disinterested or not connected. But that's where we come in. That's where we stop seeing what we do as a job and we start recognizing it as a profession. Because when we do that, when we stop just changing nappies and we start changing lives in the nappy changing moments, we will change lives. Because we're not just caregivers. We are literally baby brain builders. And often, as I said, we are that first consistent professional that a parent has encountered since becoming a parent. And that might mean they've already had 18 months on their own. So maybe we are the means to enable them to find their capabilities, their passions, their strength, their connection as a parent, and their own potential and power to help their child reach their full potential. Because confidence is everything, and we are in the perfect position to help build it for parents and for ourselves. Take a baby's giggle, for example. To the untrained eye, it's cute. But if you take a closer look, that giggle might just be telling us that they're beginning to understand cause and effect. They're beginning to make predictions about what might happen in the world or what might happen next in their world. They're testing their emotional safety. It's that back and forth. Is this safe? Is this fun? They're strengthening their muscles that they'll use for speech. And they're learning that their actions influence other people, as well as them building in that moment their foundations for empathy and reasoning and self-regulation. Now imagine saying to a parent, "We had such a giggle today. I saw you giggling," or "I saw you giggling with your baby just before you came into nursery." You know, that giggle means they're starting to understand cause and effect. They're starting to understand, build emotional connection. It's the beginning of learning to think, to reason, and to understand how to be a friend. In that moment, when you unpicked that learning for the parent, because you understood the learning and you could see the learning in the moment, you turned a fleeting moment that would have been missed into a powerful, really insightful moment. And you made that parent feel amazing. You made them feel like they're doing something phenomenal, because they are. You just showed them. And every practitioner can do this, but only if you deeply understand the why behind what you're doing, the why behind what you're seeing. Because you can't explain learning if you can't see it, because you don't know about it. And quite often you don't know about it because you haven't been taught. It's not because you've done something wrong. It's just that we're not teaching this stuff in the way that we should be teaching this stuff, potentially. And if parents can't build on stuff they can't see either. If no one's showing them what's out there, what's happening in front of their eyes, they can't know how to build and develop on it. Parental self-efficacy is a fancy word for a clinical marker, and it's described as, in other words, it's really clinically important in the journey of a child and journey of a parent. And it's described as a feeling of, I can do this, I believe in myself as a parent. And it's a predictor, a strong predictor of strong home. When you have high parental self-efficacy, you have low postnatal depression, low infant mental health issues. To you and me, that's behavior issues. And you have high home learning environments, and you have better relationships and secure mental health for both the parent and the child. And when we help parents build that belief in themselves, we change outcomes. And this graph here is taken from the research that I carried out with UCL Institute for Education. It was a randomized controlled trial that we carried out on my app called the Oliiki app. And what we found, it was meant to be a 12-week trial, and we only ran that trial for 8 weeks, because and how the trial worked was you came into the trial and you were either assigned the Oliiki app or you got the same activities on an email. And the only difference was the Oliiki activities come with the why and the science behind them. It's effectively daily CPD for practitioners, and for parents, we don't call it CPD because it's happening at home, but it's the same. It's a learning opportunity for the parent to understand the why behind the tiny activity that they're doing. And on the email, they didn't have the why and they didn't have the science. They just had the activity. And what we saw was within 4 weeks, then at the 4-week mark, everybody got the Oliiki app. And what we found was that in 4 weeks, just 4 weeks of explaining to parents, and I would suspect that would be exactly the same if we did the same with practitioners. Certainly I'm finding that with my Oliiki nurseries. Within 4 weeks, the parental self-efficacy had risen statistically significantly to be able to create this marked difference within just 4 weeks in that parental self-confidence. So what we ended up doing was everybody got the Oliiki app at 4 weeks, and then we followed them for another 8 weeks. And then what happened was the graph that had been like this ended up going like this, and everybody was on a trajectory to success because they now began to understand the why behind the tiny things that they were doing. And they began to have that belief in themselves and the support they were giving to their babies, and they began to realize how powerful and impactful they were on their baby's development. And those shifts happened incredibly quickly, and they had clear effects and the strong parent-child interactions as a result, and lower stress and higher learning for the babies. And we're finding the same thing in our Oliiki nurseries. As staff begin to understand the why behind the tiny playful adventures, they become more confident and they have greater understanding, which leads to better outcomes for them and for the babies and for the parents that they then share that learning with. And because when we upskill our staff, we upskill our parents and babies too. And when we're focused on and intentional, that change can happen really fast, and the implications are therefore huge. So what does that mean for us, especially when we work in the baby room? It means that everything we do counts, and it counts really early. It counts from the first look around your setting. We're shaping way more than the impressions that we give about the environment. We're shaping developmental opportunities from that first look around, and we're building brains. And this talk comes at such a handy time, because on the 30th of April, Ofsted published this report, and it talks about what's happening and not happening in our baby rooms. So let's go back to that block stacking that we saw earlier, where there was no narration, there was no connection, there was no attunement to the child's focus. It was a missed opportunity. And I'm sure loads of you know that that's not an isolated moment, and there's no judgment from my point of view. But it's echoed in this Ofsted report, but this new research that they've produced called Getting It Right from the Start. And if you want to read it and you don't want to read the whole thing, I've done 2 blogs about this. I'm sure that Twinkl can link those blogs for you or send them out later. It's probably an easier read than reading the whole research. But it echoed that same research that practitioners working with babies and toddlers had consistent gaps in their baby room practice, and that many practitioners are struggling to explain how their activities support development. Planning is often borrowed from the toddler room and sort of watered down into the baby room, and rather than being designed for babies' specific needs. And babies' days are too often filled with the routines of the day rather than those rich, responsive interactions that babies desperately need us to offer. And crucial conversations with parents are often missing too, when, as we've seen, there could be amazing opportunities to build trust and development and give insight, and to be able to enable them to continue learning into the home from the nursery. There is so no criticism from me in anything that I'm saying here, but it is the reality in many settings. But the exciting thing is, this is such a huge opportunity for us. Wow, imagine how fantastic this is going to be when we get all of this in place, when we start having baby room environments where these tiny interactions are happening constantly throughout the day, tiny little micro moments of development where we completely focus. And instead of talking about broccoli and nappies at the end of a day with a parent, we're talking about learning and development and engagement and connection and all the development things that we've seen throughout the experiences that we've been offering in the baby room. Because when baby room practice becomes developmentally focused and language rich and intentional, the impact is utterly profound. It's Dr. June O'Sullivan from the Leaf Nurseries. Dr. June, if you ever hear this, I apologize profusely. And she really did put it brilliantly. She says every one of our nurseries that's achieved outstanding could trace it directly back to what was happening in the baby room. And our baby rooms literally can change everything. So what are the implications of all of this for our settings, particularly our baby rooms? First, practitioners need to understand the why behind what they're doing. It's not enough to offer a sensory tray and sing a song if we don't understand the developmental purpose behind it, because if that's the case, we miss the moment. And if we don't understand it, we can't explain it to parents. And that means we also need to be building the confidence to articulate that learning clearly, whether it's in a quick pickup conversation or in a shared moment in your baby room. Secondly, we must be using as much of these first 1,000 days as humanly possible, because our babies deserve it. If we wait until a child's already walking and talking, we've already lost crucial brain building time that we can't get back. It's never too late to build brains, but the earlier we do it, the bigger and better the impact is, if you remember from that early slide. And every nappy change, every cuddle that happens in your setting, every bottle feed you do is an opportunity if we choose to treat it that way. Alternatively, it's just a job to be done. The third thing we need to do is we need to see parents as an essential partner in the process. They're not an add-on, they're not an irritation, and they're not a challenge. We need to involve them in a way that's quick and easy and doesn't add to their workload. Because when we work in partnership, that development capabilities, the development opportunities just literally multiply. And that means we've given that baby the chance to build their brain. There's 1 million synapse connections a second being created in the first 1,000 days of life. And if we use those synapse connections and connect them up together through the experiences we give the babies, then what happens is they get bigger, better, stronger brains. If we don't use them, they prune away. It's literally that binary. And it's not about adding tasks to your day. It's about changing the lens through which you view what you're already doing and helping others to do that too, which is exactly the kind of challenge that Oliiki was designed to support. And it offers daily practice, practical prompts that help your staff connect what they're doing to how babies learn, and gives parents simple ways to support that learning at home. And it's being used by nurseries that want to embed that learning and development into everyday routines without adding extra layers of planning or paperwork or whatever. But whether it's with Oliiki or another approach, the goal is absolutely the same: to help your team see the why, to share that why with parents, and to make every moment count. So if you're a leader or a manager or someone who's shaping practice, here's what I want you to think about. What does your baby room feel like through the eyes of a baby? Are the interactions warm and responsive and intentional? Do your staff understand the why behind what they do, and can they explain it? Are babies spending their days in connection and learning through play, or are their days driven by routines and jobs? Because babies are learning anyway. The only question is, what are we teaching them? Through how we care, through how we show up, through how we use the knowledge that we have or that we are gaining. You don't need to overhaul your setting tomorrow morning or throw away all the things that you've been doing. You just need to start seeing more in what you are doing and helping your team to do exactly the same, because the science is totally clear. The window of opportunity is short. It's 1,000 days. So what you do really, really matters, because the first 1,000 days lasts a lifetime. And that's me. So I hope you found that useful.